Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome the Finance and Administration Committee of the County of Renfrew here on Thursday, April 14th, 2022 at 9:30 a.m. I am now calling this meeting to order. As we gather this morning, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of Council and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history, and we are extremely grateful for their many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Ms. Wilson, has roll call been taken?
Through you, Chair, to committee, yes, roll call has been taken.
Thank you kindly. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? I see none. Can I get an adoption of the minutes of the previous meeting held on March 10th, 2022, please? Moved by Councillor Sweet, seconded by Councillor Hunt. Were there any errors or omissions? I see none. All in favor? Thank you very much. And at this time, I will pass this over to Mr. Morrow for the administration report.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to committee. There are a number of items in the administration report. First, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Tina Poplinski, who comes to us from the Pembroke Observer or Pembroke Daily. Pembroke Observer and News. I knew it changed several years ago, so now I got it right. Welcome, Tina, and it's a pleasure to have you as part of our team, and we're looking forward to continuing on some of the work that was done in the past and looking forward to some of the new ideas that you bring to the table. So congratulations and welcome to our team here at the County of Renfrew. Chair, if I may, I'll move on to number 2. The 2022 municipal election for school boards. You will see attached as Appendix 1 a number of letters, I believe, from local school boards identifying the positions that are available to run for in the upcoming municipal election that will be on the ballot for school board trustees. Item number 3, Chair, firefighter certification is attached as Appendix 2 as a letter from the Township of Brudenell, Lindock, and Raglan, and that comes to us from Mayor Keller, expressing concerns with respect to the regulations and the impact those new regulations will have on municipal budgets. Finally, Chair, that takes us to resolutions. Would you like me to stop there or read the resolution?
No, let's do information.
Okay, thank you,
Then we'll go on. Thank you. So number 1, welcome, Tina. Is there anything further on number 1? I think we're in very good hands, and I'm excited to work with you. Number 2, the 2022 school elections. And number 3, firefighter certification. And I know that most of our fire chiefs got together, and I believe they've submitted comments, and AMO has as well. Excellent. Then at that, we will move on to resolutions.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to committee, there is one resolution. With your permission, I'll read the resolution. That the Finance and Administration Committee recommend that County Council approve that the Ottawa Valley Ontario Health Team reserve be established in the amount of $65,000 for use of the Ottawa Valley Ontario Health Team Steering Committee, consistent with the provisions outlined in the transfer payment agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So with that, I'll ask for a mover and seconder to get it on the floor. Moved by the warden, seconded by Councillor Brose. Comments, questions, concerns? Yes, go ahead.
Chair, with your permission, I'll give a little bit of background.
Sure, please do.
The transfer payment agreement that we have with the province of Ontario to fund the Ottawa Valley Health Team has a provision in it for administration dollars. We are allowed a certain percentage, and for us that equates to $65,000. So the steering committee has recommended that that money be pulled aside and put in a reserve account for future use. So committee is aware, some of those funds will be used to cover off some of the county's expenses. For example, we have been doing some HR work in terms of recruitment of staff for the Ottawa Valley Health Team, and so our staff's time will be compensated through those reserve dollars. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the background. Any comments, questions, concerns? I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Thank you. Can I get a mover and seconder for the report as a whole, please? Moved by Councillor Hunt, seconded by Councillor Brose. Anything further on the administration report? All in favor? Thank you, committee. And at that, I will turn this over to Mr. Foss for the corporate services report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Finance Committee. My pleasure to present to you the finance report beginning on page 20 of your document today. I'm going to adjust my microphone so that the camera can hear me at the back. Item number 1 under information, we are sad to announce that our IT technician and webmaster, Mr. Roger Goldberg, has provided his notice of retirement effective June the 13th. Roger joined the county in 2002 on April the 15th, and as of tomorrow will reach 20 years of service. So very, very pleased and very happy for Roger. Of course, bittersweet news for us, but we have certainly enjoyed working with Roger over these years, and we wish him all the very best as he moves on to this next phase in life. Item number 2 is a corporate financial summary for COVID-19 expenditures up to December the 31st of 2021. And on page 31 of your package today, we have presented similarly to a format that we've been using in 2020, which really just by departments provides a summary of expenses for this committee. The first column is additional payroll costs, and as I've mentioned on numerous occasions, when COVID first was presented to us early in 2020, we began tracking all of our expenditures in separate general ledger accounts, as well as we have separate coding within our payroll system to track all of our COVID-related expenditures. So whether that's incremental hours that are needed, upstaffing hours, or whether those are sick costs or overtime costs, regardless of the nature of those payroll-related activities, we have tracked all of those for each of our departments, and we report that to you in this particular schedule. The second column is additional expenses. So as I mentioned, through the accounts payable office, any purchases that we are making that are directly attributed to COVID-19, either prevention or mitigation activities, we track those and report those to you. So similar to 2020, we have total expenditures of $9.3 million. There are a variety of provincial government programs, subsidy programs available to us. Some of these programs are very specifically funded. I'm thinking within community services, a number of programs where those dollars are coming in provincially and we are distributing those dollars into the community. So as the service manager, we have the agreement for those funds and distribute those funds directly. So under provincial revenue, $7.4 million. The other revenue category is really billing that we have to third-party agencies, and in this case, Arnprior Regional Health. We have an agreement in place where we bill them for our VTAC swabbing clinics, and of course, Arnprior Regional Health is receiving that funding from the province of Ontario. So we don't call it provincial funding, we call it other revenue or other agency revenue. And so $1.19 million was billed to Arnprior Regional Health for our swabbing activities. And the VTAC administration or call center, we took over that call center on September the 1st. It was an agreement that council approved to transfer that responsibility from Arnprior Regional Health to us. And so from September 1st forward, we had billing to offset our expenses in the amount of $253,000. And of course, we received federal dollars for COVID mitigation, and the feds labeled that as federal Safe Start revenue, and in order to offset our other COVID-related costs that were not already subsidized by the province of Ontario, we used $640,000 of COVID-related of federal dollars to offset our COVID-related expenditures. Back to the report itself. Item number 3, Madam Chair, is the unaudited financial statements. We've provided statements for all of our various programs, so Miramichi Lodge, Bonachere Manor, our Public Works area, Renfrew County Housing Corporation, as well as what we call the General Fund, which really includes all of the other departments that are reporting up and through to County Council. Earlier this week, we reviewed all of the statements at Operations Committee, Development and Property, Health, as well as Community Services, and so those committees received their draft and unaudited 2021 financial statements. And so my plan this morning, Madam Chair, was really to talk a little bit about the departments that are reporting directly to this committee, and then to provide an overall summary to the Finance Committee on corporately how we did. What are our year-end financial results. As I mentioned to the other committees, these are to be considered draft and unaudited, and our auditors will bring back to this committee their auditor's report in the month of June, and those financial statements will be consolidated for the corporation of the County of Renfrew in total, as well as for the Renfrew County Housing Corporation. So if you wish, Madam Chair, I could do that now or carry on.
Can we carry on, because I feel like this is going to be a very in-depth and comprehensive report and might need some time for questions and comments, concerns. So maybe let's do the rest of the information items and then we'll come back to this.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So just moving on past item number 3, item 4, on an annual basis, we receive from a Municipal Finance Policy Branch a letter enclosing the County of Renfrew's 2022 annual repayment limit. And essentially the province uses our financial information returns from a prior year. We haven't filed 2021 with the province as yet, so these are based on 2020 financial information returns, and they calculate for us, based on those financial reports, what our maximum entitlement is as far as annual repayment limit or debt servicing costs. They are telling you as a committee and County Council that our repayment limit for 2022 would be $19,179,000 per year. That's debt servicing costs. And if we were, on the page number 75, if we were to consider a debenture at a 5% rate of interest, over 20 years, we could borrow $239,016,000 with this maximum debt servicing limit that we are entitled to, and that would be the maximum under the Municipal Act for us to go out and borrow money. So I leave that to you. We have lots of capacity, if you will, to acquire more debt and debt servicing costs. And I guess, not sure if the province is really trying to encourage that, but they are certainly making you aware that this level of debt financing is available to you. Item number 5 is simply our monthly report on workload activities with respect to our Provincial Offences Court. We are preparing for the end of April for our very first in-person court date. We don't believe that it will be a hybrid meeting. If in fact we do have any individuals who will appear in person, our Justice of the Peace will not be here in person, will appear virtually in order to preside over the court day. But effective this very first sitting, individuals who are appearing in Provincial Offences Court have the opportunity to either appear virtually which most individuals are electing to do, or they can appear in person in the Provincial Offences Court directly below us, and now in the County Administration Building. You will note that in the month of March, we have had a bit of a bump up from our very low number of charges in February of 307 total charges, back up to 666 charges for the month of March, but somewhat below what we would deem our typical average to be of about 800 charges per month or 10,000 charges per year, but we are moving back up in that direction. Item number 6 is really just a report for POA backlog, and of course, because of COVID-19 and because of the fact that courts were not operating whatsoever, not virtually in the beginning, we continue to have a backlog in our courts. We had 7 courts scheduled for the month of March, and 3 of them were canceled. And those courts are canceled primarily because we do not have the significant number of justice of the peace positions in place. There are vacancies that exist, and although the province last year appointed a number of justices throughout the province, there is a 12 to 18 month lead time to get those justices in courtrooms presiding over provincial offences courts. So that is coming, but we're not there yet. So we've canceled 3 other courts. We have 943 charges that are in backlog, and we estimate that that would take us, with this number of courts allocated to us, approximately 13 months to clear our backlog. Item 7, all of committee will be aware of the fact that there was a federal budget that was happened earlier in this month, and the Municipal Finance Officers Association, I thought, provided a fairly useful summary for Ontario municipalities to understand the impacts of those announcements in that particular budget, and specifically those that are related to municipalities. And so we certainly leave that for your information. And Madam Chair, before that's the last of the information items, and perhaps we could review that before we move into bylaws.
Wonderful, thank you. So information item number 1, the retirement of Roger Goldberg. Certainly wish him well. Number 2, the COVID-19 corporate financial summary. We're going to skip over number 3 for now. Number 4, the 2022 annual repayment. Councillor Donoghue.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Foss. Am I correct in understanding in what, from a personal perspective on a mortgage, would be referred to as the blended repayment? Is that what the ARL, or is the does the ARL blend both capital, the principal repayment, plus interest, or simply the interest, the carrying charges?
And through you, Chair, thank you for the question. These are debt servicing costs, so principal and interest. So the attempt in this document is to identify your maximum of 25% of own source revenues would be your maximum legislated debt servicing ceiling, and that's principal and interest. So very similar to a mortgage payment. For us, it's typically debenture payments, which follow very, very closely to your, a residential mortgage concept, where there's a principal and interest payment. So they are suggesting that maximum debt servicing cost, principal and interest, be $19 million per year.
Supplementary, Councillor Donoghue.
Thank you once again, Madam Chair, and thank you through you to Mr. Foss. So if I'm reading that correctly, and within the FIR, it shows that our current payment is debt servicing costs are about just over 1.7 million. So we're only 10%. We're only at 10% of our debt, and certainly I am not at all proposing that we take on a significant debt load, as we are seeing interest charges, carrying charges beginning now to move northwards again. But I think that this can be taken as once again a indication of substantial solvency, let us say. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think it is a good news story. Anything further on number 4? Number 5, the POA workload. Number 6, the backlog in POA. I'm keeping my eye on you, Warden, just to make sure. I don't want to miss you. And number 7, the federal budget summary. I'd like to thank you and your staff, Mr. Foss, for this, because I even had trouble making heads or tails out of that budget, so this was very helpful to me. Thank you. Anything further on 7? Then at that, Mr. Foss, do you want to take us back to number 3 and take us through the unaudited financial statements? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in your package, we'll begin a discussion on page 32. I'll just give you a moment to get there. Yesterday at Community Services, the chair, Councillor Brose, asked a very, I thought was an excellent question about trying to come to grips with the differences between our budgets and our performance targets, which are all set on a municipal surplus basis, and what we present to you is the bottom line, which is our accounting surplus or our PSAB compliant financial statement presentation. And that's an important question, because when our auditors come back into these chambers in June and present a consolidated audited financial report to you, they are going to be commenting on the bottom line number, which is a PSAB compliant presentation of our financial results. What we do when we set a budget, and as we present to you quarterly financial statements and year-end financial statements, is we are setting a budget which ensures that all of our expenditures have a funding source. So whether it's operating activities where we have a tax levy that's going to pay for those operating activities, or whether we have cost-shared programs which are cost-shared with the province, we have provincial subsidies or perhaps federal subsidies, or we identify capital acquisitions which need to be financed from a particular separate area. So that could be a transfer from reserves to finance capital, or we may have to go into debt financing to take care of our more significant capital projects. But Council is very acutely aware of ensuring that all of our expenditures, whether they're operating or capital, must be met by a particular form of financing. And so our municipal surplus, when we set a budget, always ensures that all of those expenses, whether they're operating or capital, are covered by some funding concept. And that budget is always set at a surplus of 0, that the expenditures are always covered by some source of financing. But the Public Sector Accounting Board does not recognize a number of those accounts when they require us to produce financial statements which are in compliance with the Act, the Municipal Act, and the Municipal Act defers that responsibility to the Public Sector Accounting Board. So all municipalities across the country must provide financial statements in a PSAB compliant format. And that format is very close to what you would expect to see in a commercial set of financial statements. So the private sector, if you will, versus the public sector. So we are all reporting financial results that are very similar to a set of financial statements that you would see in the private sector. So really looking at page number 32, and we're going to talk today about the general fund, and that's where all of the departments that report through to this committee are held. You have a municipal deficit, not a surplus, but a deficit of just under $500,000, so $490,620. That's the budget that you set to cover all of your expenditures has been exceeded by $500,000. So we're running a deficit. We reviewed yesterday at Health Committee, Miramichi Lodge and Bonnechere Manor that both have a small operating surplus. Both of them are about $16 or $17 million in total revenues, and Miramichi Lodge had a $24,000 surplus. So in the black, but barely in the black. And the Renfrew County Housing Corporation we reviewed yesterday afternoon, and there was a surplus of about $795,000. Again, that's against an operating budget. The budget would have been set to have a surplus of $0, and they ran a surplus of $795,000. So we reviewed the issues that were leading up to the surplus in Renfrew County Housing Corporation. But we have a loss in the general fund. The adjustments that I'm showing below the municipal surplus are those items that need to either be removed from those statements or added back into those statements in order to be PSAB compliant. In total, we have a $472,000 total surplus across all of those entities. But when the auditors come back to meet with you, they are going to present a accounting or PSAB surplus of $9.7 million. So what's the difference? Well, capital items that we include in our financial statements have to be removed. You can't consider in your operating expenses office supplies to be the same as capital items, although council is very aware of how do we finance for that capital, and you want to include that in your budget. You can't include that in your operating expenses. They must be removed. We do not budget for depreciation. In this corporation, what we do is we are required to show you what the depreciation or amortization costs are for all of our assets, but then we pull it out and we add back in the actual capital budget that council has approved to ensure that we have enough revenue to cover all of the capital expenditures planned for the year. Likewise, when we have transfers that are going to reserves, we cannot include those as expenses in our financial statements. They must be removed, and all of those transfers from reserves to pay for capital must be removed in order to be PSAB compliant. And at the bottom, debt principal, again, we have to ensure the budget has enough money to cover principal and interest payments, but only the interest payments are allowed to be reflected as an expenditure on your corporate financial statements at the end of the year. So we do that to ensure that all of council is aware of the difference between a municipal surplus or your budgeted amounts and what is your actual financial statement at year end, which will have a total consolidated surplus of $9.7 million. So page number 33, which is just adjacent to that, if you have a printed copy, maybe you don't. But we're now talking about specifically the general revenue fund because we've looked at Bonnechere Manor, Miramichi Lodge, and the Housing Corporation for the other committees. So you will notice that here are all of the committees that are reporting up and through to all of the departments reporting to each committee within the county council structure. We're going to focus our discussion today primarily on the Finance and Administration Committee, but I'm just I'm letting you see that in operations, we were about $487,000 under budget in operations. Development and Property Committee, $373,000 under budget. The Health Committee, $2.7 million over budget, and that's primarily being driven by the report I brought forward last month, which dealt with our triannual. Every 3 years, we have an independent actuary reviewing our WSIB-related liabilities and adjusting what those liabilities should be based on the current cases that are before us. So that charge happened essentially on December the 31st, and that is what is driving that negative result for the Health Committee. I'm sorry, social services should be entitled community services. I apologize for that. This is a page that we don't look at all that often, but under community services, you'll see that we have a total favorable variance of $287,000. So today's discussion is really, let's review finance and admin departments, beginning with county council. So really just turning on to the next page. At the top of that page would be members of council. I suspect that this committee would have expected that we should have a favorable position for county council, given the fact that the pandemic has restricted many council-related activities that we need to budget for. And perhaps in 2022, some of these expenditures will be realized as as the pandemic mitigation lessens and folks are back into more of a regular routine. Members of council show an $89,000 underspend. Our representative at the AMO board spent very little as far as traveling expenses, so $9,000 under budget. Council conventions, $14,000 under budget. Council mileage, $8,000 under budget. FCM board, $3,500 under budget. Hospitality, of course, related to our meeting activities, $15,000 under budget. Special events, which is really advocacy and delegations. Of course, most of that is to cover the cost of attendance in person at a variety of activities, so hotels and meals and travel, as well as that conference related activities, so $29,000 under budget, and warden expenses, $7,900 under budget. So I suspect that most councillors would have anticipated that we would be under budget within the members of council area. Madam Chair, I could stop after every department, or I could just carry on.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest that. So are there any questions up to this point? I see none. And although it was lovely saving some money, I think we're all looking forward to getting back to some conferences and some events. So I think you can go on to the next department, please.
Thank you, Chair. So immediately below on the page is general administration, and that's showing $7,000 under budget. Just to highlight as an example, about a third of the way down, you'll see COVID expenditures within this department of $29,374 in total. And under the R's, the revenue section, you'll see an offsetting $29,374. So that is our approach to reporting COVID costs. Those expenditure accounts are available to all departments, and we have to ensure that we are bringing in offsetting revenue so that, once again, in 2021, there are no direct ratepayer impacts to COVID-19 mitigation efforts in the county of Renfrew. So the property tax bill did not pay for those expenditures directly. Those expenditures were offset by provincial or federal government subsidies. Would also like to just draw to your attention, under revenue provincial, you'll see $47,000 in there. $31,889 was directly related to our service delivery review. And we had applied for municipal modernization funds for our service delivery review, which primarily was a sort of a 2020 and then into 2021 activity. So the balance of those costs were realized in 2021. This is Strategy Corp. And so we offset those expenditures with that provincial grant. So no impact to this particular department, but just wanted to highlight that for you. Directly below that service delivery review account is special projects, and we have it titled really strategic plan. So originally some of our implementation activities with respect to our council-approved strategic plan are budgeted in this particular area. But in 2021, we made a decision to move forward with a compensation review in two parts. One part was for council compensation, and you received the results of that report last month. And then second to that was to conduct a non-union compensation review. And so that particular review both of those reviews began late in 2021, and the final reports have been presented to County Council in the 2022 period. But these dollars were expended, if you will, in the 2021 period, and we've financed that through our budget for that special project or strategic plan initiatives. And Madam Chair, maybe that's all the comments for the General Admin Department.
Thank you. All right, any questions for General Admin? Councillor Donahue.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was remiss just while Mr. Foss was presenting the general administration. I wanted to go back and look. When Council was entertaining the discussion of adoption of the 2021 budget, we did zero in on the members of Council. And there was fairly extensive discussion at that time, but driven largely by COVID restrictions. The initial budget that was presented in January of 2021 was for $611,000 for council expenses. I think that probably took up 20 minutes to half an hour of a discussion at budget workshop. And I know that it is certainly an advisory caution as we increase each year, that if we decrease when we return to normal, there may be a substantial increase. I'm only raising this because we actually reduced the budget from $611,000 and realized a $90,000 surplus. So if we had left our budget at $611,000, that would be a $190,000 surplus. And I'm only raising this because I certainly am acutely aware that probably for the 2023 budget, there's going to be an equally lengthy discussion, because we are likely will anticipate a substantial percentage increase. However, I think that that's appropriate, because if in fact we had adopted the budget as presented in 2021, in my estimation, we are essentially through the council section budgeting a surplus of $190,000. So for the transparency, both for this group, for the larger group that is the council for the county of Renfrew, but I think for the broader population as well, that transparency of actually budgeting with a clear view of what your anticipated expenditures are, certainly that is what drives my consideration of any of the budgets that I have entertained while sitting in this room.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that was a very lengthy conversation. Anything further on general admin? All right, then we can move on. Thank you, Mr. Foss.
The next department that's reporting directly to this committee is Information Technology, and that's on page 38 of the package. And on page 38, Information Technology Department, in total, about $58,000 under its estimated costs. The very top line is annual software maintenance fees, and we talked at budget time about entering into a new project, a test project, if you will, which was going to be a cloud backup project. So essentially, in layman's terms, instead of having hardware on a daily basis and overnight backing up all of our data on our corporate services servers, we were going to move the backup of that data into a cloud-based management system, and we were going to test that with the county administration building. However, given the fact that we also approved moving forward with an IT strategy review, which began in 2021, we deferred moving forward with that project, because it certainly would have been one of the bigger considerations of some of the major projects that we were going to undertake with respect to the strategy review. And so we deferred that. That project is still going to move forward. It's our intention to move forward with that. But given the uncertainty of what the strategy review was going to be, which direction that was going to take, we simply deferred that project. And so that's the significant savings that you're seeing on the top line item of that budget. Of course, if we move to a cloud-based backup, I mean, there would be future significant hardware savings because we are not backing up all that data locally within our own server room itself. So there was obviously a business plan and consideration to moving in that direction, but that process has just been deferred, hopefully to be re-engaged in the late in 2022 and then moving into 2023. The other thing I'd like to draw your attention to within information technology is you'll see in the R section under Revenue Provincial Special Projects, there's $25,716. That comes from the Municipal Modernization Review number 2. That's the review stream, and that was for our consultants, the Perry Group, which we engaged last year in the fall to begin work on the IT strategy review. In total, I believe that engagement was somewhere in about $59,000 or roughly $60,000. So some of that work, and based on progress payments, was done in the 2021 year, and the balance of that will be reflected as completed in the 2022 period. But that is 100% offset by the provincial subsidy that we received, Municipal Modernization Review Stream Modernization Grant number 2. Perhaps I'd leave it there, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns about IT? Nope, you're doing a fabulous job. Let's carry on.
Directly below information technology is the Human Resources Department. We had a budget net municipal cost of $247,000 against an actual net cost of $91,808. So that's a $155,000 underspend that's being realized in this particular department. That is coming from one line account only. We had created some provision in 2020 for some significant legal costs. That provision was part of our 2020 financial statements, and in 2021 we realized some significant savings with respect to those accruals of costs, and so that credit is now flowing through in the 2021 year. And so that is driving primarily our underspend position within the Human Resources Department. The other thing I'd like to just draw your attention to, of course, is that we have, under the salary areas, a budget of $444,000 and actual salaries of $538,000. So about $583,000. So $138,000 overspend. And of course, in February of 2021, we brought forward to you a business case to really restructure our existing human resource department and add some additional components to that. And that we did throughout the year. And by June, we had a new manager in place, and Mr. Belmore is sitting at the back of the table, as well as we have transitioned to additional human resource coordinators. County Council approved a business plan to add an HRC position to support our lower tier municipalities. And so that position came on board in June of 2021. And although, as you see under municipal recoveries, we only have about $4,000 being recovered in the 2021 year, we are fully engaged. This year, that HRC position is spending at least 60% and sometimes 80 and 100% of their time supporting our municipal partners with our local municipal councils. And so that activity level has dramatically increased, and we are full as far as our engagements go. So that's really good news. The other thing that took place was there was a transfer in 2021 of a human resource position that was working inside of the Paramedic Services Department, and a decision was made with our CAO to transfer that position back into this new and restructured Human Resources Department. And so the costs for that position are being reflected in the salaries area, but you'll see under the line item, which is Recovery County Departments, that is $68,000 higher than the budget was. And of course, we are charging back the actual salaries and benefits for that position to the Paramedic Services Department, where the budget existed originally for that service. And so there's, between the two departments, there's no net cost difference. We just have that position residing within our HR department here in the county building, but they are dedicated 100% of their time to supporting paramedic services. Perhaps with that, I would leave the Human Resources Department.
Thank you. Anything on human resources? Councillor Brose.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Mr. Foss. I'm just kind of curious, and maybe Mr. Belmore would have more information as well. With the service review and with the pending retirement of Mr. Goldberg, would there be a comprehensive review on the operational structure then for the IT department moving forward?
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you for the question. It's an excellent question, and certainly when we spend time with the Perry Group looking at our existing IT services, and if you recall Susan's presentation to Council, she used a pyramid, if you will, and talked about the foundation, which is really our network infrastructure, our hardware maintenance, all of the things that our IT staff currently is engaged in, which is really to support the network and infrastructure at the County of Renfrew. And what she is recommending to us, and we have yet to bring back our staff recommendations to Council about moving forward, but she is recommending to us that the Information Technology Department plays a different role, if you will, than simply ensuring that when you turn your computer on, everything works, and that the information technology staff are more engaged from a business process perspective right inside each of our departments. So ensuring that they have appropriate IT resources as they move forward with digitizing and updating many of the services that they are delivering. So currently they are making those decisions and moving forward on their own, because our staffing level is really just maintaining that foundational piece. And so the recommendation in the Perry Group report was to add additional IT staffing resources to play that different role in our organization, the County of Renfrew, which is very similar to what our peers are moving toward because of the fact that we are in a new and digital world. And so, yes, there will be a recommendation coming forward from a staffing perspective of what the IT department should look like in the future, and how do we get from where we are today, ensuring that, that the infrastructure works, to moving toward that trusted partner concept where we have resources available, IT resources available to work with our departments to ensure they are achieving maximum efficiencies throughout the use of technology in their everyday service delivery components. So that is coming back to Council. As a matter of fact, the senior leadership team has a meeting next week scheduled, and we will spend a lot of time preparing our staff recommendations to Council for how we get from where we are now to where we hope to be at a future point in time.
Thank you. Councillor Donahue.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Just when I think I'm beginning to grasp this, Mr. Foss throws a new wrinkle that confounds me once again. With respect to the legal fees, it is something that I highlighted on here, and it is quite interesting at my own municipality within the last month. We've had this same discussion. A quirk of percentages is they can go up 1 trillion%, but they can only go down 100%. But curiously, our expenses for legal fees are down 319%. They are $131,000 over budget, and unless we were actually picking the pockets of lawyers, I am curious, as this was discussed, it seems to me that provision has been made in a past year to allocate funds to future years, or perhaps these are legal issues that we might anticipate might be multi-year. So I am curious how ultimately anything that I see in an expense line with parentheses around it is a revenue. So I'm curious how we would be showing revenues in our legal fees.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to our councillor. In fact, the nature of the credit is not a revenue. It was a provision for cost in the 2021 year that we were able to not realize that accrual or that provision for cost in 2021. So it does have a multi-year component to us, and so we have to reflect the fact that those costs will not occur, and we have to reflect it in the financial period where we realized that to be the case. Later in today's meeting, we do have a closed meeting on today's agenda, and perhaps I could circle back with the details of that particular line item once we move into closed, but I would not be able to discuss those at this time in the meeting.
Thank you for that. I was thinking the same thing, that we're going into closed and there will be discussion. Councillor Donoghue, you have a supplementary?
I do, Madam Chair. Thank you. So certainly I'm going to be sensitive to this becoming closed adjacent at this point, but so we had made provision in 2021 for an expenditure of $60,000. It would have seemed to me that the most we could have not spent would have been $60,000. So I'm trying to arrive at this very, very carefully. The credit that is presented here is because anticipated expenditures in following years may now have been set aside. Am I coming close to understanding the concept?
Sort of close.
And through you, Chair, so we booked in 2020 an expenditure level far in excess of $60,000. That expenditure was not realized, but not until 2021 were we aware of that particular fact. But in 2021, we now have to reflect a credit. So those expenditures in 1 year are being essentially reduced, but in a subsequent fiscal period. That's probably the best way to say that.
Anything further? All right, and I believe that's all the, oh, there's one more, sorry. Stealing your thunder there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, Provincial Offences Administration, and I'm going to just find the page reference for you. That is page 47 at the top. And once you arrive there, you will see that we had a Provincial Offences Court, of course, is not a net expenditure to the County of Renfrew, but a net revenue generating department. And we anticipated net revenues of $546,000, and we realized revenues of $546,000. That is an example of perfect budgeting. Or, what we may want to say to you is that primarily our POA fine revenues were $319,000 under budget, and similar to the 2020 fiscal period, we have an opportunity to utilize some of the federal Safe Start revenues to offset the rather depressed level of activity that is taking place within our Provincial Offences Court for fine revenues. So many of our peers are doing exactly the same thing in 2021 as they did in 2020, which is to use some of that federal Safe Start revenue grant, if you will, to support our budget position within provincial offenses. We can't use it to make money, but we can certainly use it to offset our net budget shortfall, because of the reduced activity taking place within our provincial offenses courts. When your courts are closed, and when the courts are not even available to operate virtually, we have a very valid case to be able to say that this is definitely a COVID-related mitigation strategy. And so we didn't use all of the revenue shortfall, but we used $226,746, which is shown under recoveries provincial one time. We used those dollars to offset our net shortfall to ensure our variance is zero. Exactly the same work that we did in 2020. I don't recall the exact amount, but essentially we have used federal Safe Start to support that decreased level of activity. And finally, Madam Chair, perhaps while I'm on that page, there is a department at the bottom entitled Financial Expenses, and no other committee is really dealing with this directly, so I thought I'd review that with the Finance Committee. Just wanted to kind of highlight some of the things that were within this department. You'll see we have a budget for the county share of tax write-offs. So at your own local municipalities, when there is a tax write-off, Section 357 decision that's being made, there is multiple components of that tax bill. So that decision at the local municipality impacts also the county level of taxation. So we share in the tax write-off in the same proportions as we share in the tax revenue for the properties. And so we budget on an annual basis about $300,000, and the total coming from all local municipalities was $360,000. We had a provision for unallocated funds of $300,000 that we did not use in 2021. The next line item, again, late in the 2021 budget activities, was our insurance premium renewal. We didn't get that renewal until December the 30th, and so our reaction to that was to ensure that rather than opening up all of the budgets that have insurance line items, is that we consolidated the budget pressure on this one item, which is $100,000. A big majority of that was offset at budget time by the reduction in the council budget. And I think we worked very hard to reduce all of those accounts that we felt were going to come in to offset this budget pressure. So the actual insurance premiums are found in all of the financial statements in all of the departments throughout the county, but we had to very quickly identify this item and place it somewhere to ensure it was accounted for within the budget. Below that, there are two surplus adjustment for debt principal and interest expense. You'll see I'm $260,000 under in principal and $112,000 under in interest. We converted our construction loan, our temporary construction loan for Madawaska River Bridge in Armprior early in 2021. The budget, although we drafted a budget for debt servicing costs over a 10-year period to repay this debenture that we moved into, the transitionary period where we thought we would have two debenture payments being processed in the 2021 year, there was some delays in converting the short-term loan into a debenture, and that debenture was approved by these chambers. So we only processed one payment in 2021, and so for 2022 and the next 9 years we will have two payments to process, but there will be a final year where only one payment will be processed to end that loan 10 years from now. So that's why the budget is showing a little bit of a surplus in that area. But of course, it's a savings to us in 2021, but we're going to have to tack that payment on, that single payment in the final year of the debenture for Madawaska River Bridge. And I'll just give to you a summary of the transfer to reserves. It's a big number, $16,824,000. So where does that come from? Well, when we receive gas tax funds, this year we received $2,793,217. We receive that revenue and we immediately transfer it to the gas tax reserve. And then the Public Works Department was the only department that utilized all of those gas tax reserve dollars to complete their construction projects, and we reviewed that with the Operations Committee on Tuesday. But this is the transfer of those gas tax monies going into reserve. We also received an additional, a top-up, if you will, of cannabis revenue in 2021, $13,908, and we transferred that to the cannabis reserve. And I believe the Development and Property Department used some of that money for a study that took place during the year. Our budget called for, in our long-term financing plan, it called for a transfer to reserves of exactly $5,262,450, and we transferred exactly that amount into our TCA renewal reserve. The Public Works Department, you'll recall a change, if you will, where we no longer finance part of the capital activities within Public Works directly from the levy. Instead, we transfer those dollars into the Public Works reserves for their construction purposes. That was $8,586,092. And finally, happy to report that in accordance with our service delivery improvement project, that business plan, where we used about $3 million of reserve money to finance the redevelopment of this building. This is the first year where the savings, the efficiency savings, are being transferred back into that reserve to repay that amount. So we transferred exactly $169,149 back into that reserve. In 7 years' time, that entire amount will be repaid through efficiency savings. In 2022, the efficiencies increased to $467,000 per year, and this council will enjoy those savings on an ongoing basis. The first 6 years to repay the money we borrowed, but after that, that surplus will be available for council to decide what it is they would like to do with those monies. And I believe, Madam Chair, I am at the end of that department.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll just go back. Any comments about provincial offenses? All right, and then the line items that have no home. So Jeff has given them a home with finance and admin. I see none. All right, anything further on 3? Councillor Donahue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is with respect to two things, I guess. There was that initial chart that Mr. Foss had drawn up that shows the municipal surplus of $472,000. But I wonder if I'm understanding correctly, there was an unbudgeted item in 2021, which was the actuarial review that brought about, just bear with me one moment, just under $5 million of extra WSIB costs, $4.816 million. Those, as I understand, were charged to the 2021 budget and distributed across various sectors. Certainly the largest impact was the paramedic service at just under $3.5 million. So that was an unbudgeted expense that ultimately is going to be static but for perhaps annual increases, but it is good for the next 3 years until such time as the next actuarial review will be done. So but for this being that year of the actuarial review, the municipal surplus would have been the 472,000 plus 4.8 million that was unbudgeted and unanticipated until such time as that review was done. I think that that's important to keep that in mind, that we are now, having charged that against the 2021 budget, it will simply be subject to any annual increase that may be anticipated on an ongoing basis, and not that shock of a substantial increase. But I did want to, so when this was first brought forward at the 1 month ago, in February, first to FNA and then ultimately to Council, I had put forward at that time that these are the costs of doing business that the province will ultimately be picking up, as I have constantly indicated, their half, which is about 48.5% rather than 50%. But I am wondering, as is normal, and Mr. Foss did refer to this at Health Committee just earlier this week, that it is always a trailing, there is always a lag. And I'm wondering, based on the provincial government's ability to close out their year and have their year-end financials, et cetera, what is the most recent county allocation to the paramedic service that the provincial share is based on? Is that the 2020 fiscal year, or is it the 2019 fiscal year?
Just to comment on the WSIB, we had the same sticker shock in 2018 as I remember it. So I think maybe every 4 years we should be thinking about this. But go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I think the question is really around how does the province play a role in this sticker shock, if you will. And the province, of course, we had received funding in 2021 based on our 2020 budget. The province cares little from a funding point of view about what your actual expenses are. Although they've made some statements around we are partners and we are responsible for 50% of delivering paramedic services throughout the province, they are doing that on council-approved budgets from a prior period. They never, although we report actual financial results to the province, and we will do it again for the 2021 period, which will reflect that we are significantly over budget, the province will not use that information to fund us one nickel. However, they will look again to a budget for the 2022 period, which is already approved by this council, to be able to fund us their 50% share in a future period. So essentially, they are limiting themselves to never being exposed to a actual result which is above council-approved budget. So that is their funding mechanism. They have the information. We provide that information to them, but they use, in this case, and the statements we're looking at, the 2021 provincial subsidy for paramedic service was based on our approved 2020 budget.
Supplementary, Councillor Donahue.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you through you to Mr. Foss. I want to first respond to, and they are connected actually, towards your comment that we had the sticker shock in 2018 and once again. So I think, again, the fact that this substantial increase, adjustment to WSIB funding, we were able to accommodate that in our 2021 budget year and still realize almost $500,000 surplus. So I think it's important that this committee and ultimately the council understands that. But for that sticker shock, that's what the surplus would have been. But getting back then to Mr. Foss's point, it is good to be the king or the funding agency, let us say. But we have, and I'm not sure, there are probably rules surrounding how one goes about this, but should the county of Renfrew anticipate that what our actuarial review has now shown on a going forward basis, if this is something that we could start making provision in our budgets for, so then they are located in our budget that is going to then be subject to the matching review. Because we have now charged it and accommodated it within a surplus from 2021, the province has essentially been indemnified from any increase in this, because this will never show up in a budget. An incremental increase that might be budgeted for in 2023 and 24 and 25 will be. But this all but $5 million expense, it seems to me, is now being borne entirely through the property tax as a cost of doing business for the emergency services. Do I have that correct, Madam Chair? If Mr. Foss could confirm.
Okay, I want to respond to something you said. That's exactly the road I was going down, so that we're not faced with sticker shock every 4 years or every 5 years, or whenever an actuary has to come in and perform this kind of review, because most of us sat here in 2018 and we said the exact same thing. Go ahead, Mr. Foss.
Our 2021 budget assumes a WSIB-related burden factor on every dollar of payroll that we pay for paramedic employees. And I believe our burden factor is about 9%. And that burden factor is established by our actuary in the intervening years in order to ensure that we are putting away sufficient dollars to be able to keep our liability obligation pretty much in line with what the actuary is asking us to establish. So in 2018, they dramatically increased their recommendation for our burden factor for payroll from 2% up to over 9%. And so in the intervening years, we have budgeted and set aside dollars essentially at that 9% burden factor. What was certainly unanticipated was that when they conducted the review in 2021, it was significantly worse than it was in 2018. And so that higher liability now has to be set in our financial statements or recognized for potential future costs. And so they will have recommended a new burden factor for us for every dollar of payroll, and we will budget for that and set ourselves that amount in our payroll system in order to tuck those dollars away for 2022, 23, and 24, at which time we have to have another actuarial valuation of liabilities. At some point, the hope is that we will have management activities that will be successful in reducing the number of WSIB claims within the paramedic department, and therefore our liability that we have on our balance sheet at the end of the year, and one of these 3-year terms will be reduced, and we'll have an offsetting credit against our financial statements because our actual liability position is much better than the previous actuarial estimates. However, in this last 3-year period, we went the wrong way. We went the wrong way, not slightly, but fairly significantly. And so that needs to be accounted for in our financial documents, if you will. But our budget, again, for 22 and 23 and 24 will contain those higher provisions to be able to continue to tuck money away to ensure that our liability stays at what the actuary expects it to be. So we could always have more actuarial reviews than simply just once every 3 years. And if this organization thought that it would be prudent, we could have an actuarial review at the end of 22 or the end of 23 to ensure that the trend is moving the right way, if you will, and continue to recognize maybe some of those higher costs on a more frequent basis We are required under the Act to do it at least every 3 years, and that's what we've been doing and engaging with an actuary for every 3 years. But that's really the history behind how we find ourselves in this sticker shock position once again. We did provide for that higher level of liabilities, anticipated liabilities, but our actual results were far worse than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donahue, do you have a supplementary? Because I also have Councillor Hunt.
Just a final, Madam Chair, thank you. Yeah, and I certainly understand all of us sitting in the room, each of us deal with unfunded liabilities. This is one of those, thou shalt not have this as an unfunded liability. So I certainly recognize that, and I submit that even if our experience stabilizes and becomes static, that curve is still going to go down. Even if it doesn't reduce, we are not seeing the curve steepening on an increase, which is what we have seen with the report in 2021. If I'm understanding, though, now we have a burden factor that is multiplied against salary, whatever department it may exist within. Of course, the largest one is within the paramedic service. But if and maybe I'm missing something, so if we have already charged the adjustment against our 2021 budget, it was my understanding that that was essentially identifying where we would be at the delivery of the next actuarial review. So if we are now charging a premium or a surplus, a surcharge, if you will, onto salaries of the burden, is that not paying it twice if we've already allocated funds out of our 2021 surplus towards that $4.8 million?
Mr. Foss?
Thank you, Chair. So really, to put this in some perspective, when we had our 2018 actuarial review for liabilities, we went from, I don't have that in front of me, but we went from whatever our current position was to a point where the actuaries required us to provide a provision, whereas at December 31st, 2021, we would have $5.5 million of liabilities, of a liability provision created through this payroll burden factor. So ensuring that we continue to set aside these monies so that we match or we meet what the actuary thought we would have experienced by the end of 2021. So in fact, on December the 30th, let's say, using the burden factor, we had set aside $5,362,215. That was essentially exactly what the actuary expected when they did their review in 2018. However, the review that they did at the end of 2021, when we have, I think it's 75% increase in the number of cases before them, the new target, if you will, was $8,844,000 because of the dramatic increase in activity with respect to paramedic WSIB claims. So we're following exactly what the actuary is telling us to do. Our difficulty and our challenge is that our actual experience at the 3-year cycle is much worse than the actuaries could ever have anticipated looking at the case data that was before them 3 years ago. And so that required an adjustment of $3.4 million in total that had to be done in order to recognize this liability at the end of the 2021 year. So we will have in place now a program where in 22, 23, and 24, we will have burden factors within the payroll system to ensure that by December the 31st of 24, we will have set aside $8,844,000, exactly what the actuary is telling us that we should set aside in our, we don't really have a future or crystal ball, but if in fact, our case activity level does not get worse, we anticipate we should have sufficient liabilities to provide for that estimate when we get to that point at the end of 2024. However, if our activity level continues to increase as dramatically as it has in the last 3 years, we will go through this exercise one more time, where we're going to have to dramatically increase that liability provision to ensure that we recognize those future costs in accordance with this estimate. So we have a system in place, as every municipality who is a Schedule II employer must do. So we have a system in place. We are following to the T the actuarial estimates and provisions for liabilities. The problem is simply that our activity level has far exceeded that which was anticipated by the case data that we had at the time.
Thanks for that, Jeff. And I just want to go back to some comments I made several meetings ago at County Council, I guess, when this originally came up. Our challenge is not, a management issue. We have put measures in place with respect to having Dr. Gray come in and implement a system. Many of the cases that are currently continue to be problematic are ones that existed prior to that. But again, our challenge is a systemic one, in that we have presumptive legislation for PTSD that is a challenge for us to manage. And it's not unique to us. All the remainder of the paramedic programs have the same challenges across the province, because it automatically makes the assumption that an individual, once making the claim, has PTSD. And then again, the second component of the challenge moving forward is that they automatically go off on WSIB. And to be frank, that system is broken as well. Once an individual is off on WSIB, it is extremely difficult for us to get them back in the workplace, because WSIB manages the file, not us. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and you couldn't be more correct about it being broken. Councillor Hunt, finally, over to you.
Thank you. Some of my questions have been asked now, but I'm wondering, what is the actuarial cost? Like, what does it cost to have this evaluation? And I was going to suggest, but you've already thrown it out, that perhaps we should be doing it more often, and that way we'd be able to get it into the budget and get some compensation back from the province.
Through you, Chair, our agreement with the actuary, I believe it's $4,500. I think that's that was our 2021 cost for this review.
Councillor Hunt, are you willing to do it for $3,500?
Well, just because it is such a big number, and that seems to be relatively inexpensive, I'm just wondering if we should not move to having it, annually or semi-annually. Especially like listening to the CAO speaking, we still have that problem out there, and it would give an opportunity to put it in the budget, as Councillor Donoghue was perhaps suggesting.
They're just discussing the merits, but I agree with you. I would have thought that it would have been far more expensive. What did you guys decide? Yes, go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to committee. Staff is recommending that the committee provide direction to staff that we undertake an additional review in 2023 and bring it back. I believe is that what we've for the 2022 year, correct? And then we bring it back to committee to see where we landed, and we would revisit it again after that in terms of frequency.
So can I get a mover and seconder on that? Moved by Councillor Hunt, seconded by Councillor Donoghue. Discussion. Councillor Donoghue.
Just one question. I'm wondering if ultimately the impact of this has been spread out over a lengthier period. I'm wondering if, and I'm not opposed to doing this, but I'm wondering if Mr. Foss can even venture to suggest or speculate. I'm wondering if this may lead to substantially more volatility if we're looking at it over a one-year basis, that we may be seeing substantial peaks and valleys in our actuarial. I think there probably is at least some smoothing. And on the budget for Renfrew, I mean, I think that that's worth giving the county of Renfrew, that is, that there is some consideration given towards that. At some point, I believe, as Mr. Foss has suggested, there is going to be a stasis at the very least, hopefully an improvement. Both of those things are ultimately going to lead to a backside of the curve. Every curve that goes up comes back down, and everything that we're going to do is going to describe a curve at some point. But on this one, I'm wondering if that curve is going to have a whole lot of peaks and valleys as it's going up and a whole lot of peaks and valleys as it's coming down as well, which is going to make budgeting problematic. Yeah, I think it would be worth giving consideration to that in any event.
Mr. Foss, did you have a comment on that? I think that the idea of doing it yearly is a good one, whether there are peaks and valleys or not. Please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just have to double check the legislation. However, we're required legislatively to do it once every 3 years. And our auditors will be expecting that particular assessment, if you will, in order to provide their opinion on our financial statements. If we do a liability review in the intervening years, I believe we have an option whether or not to account for that officially in our financial records in the intervening years. So it could simply be a management tool to ensure that our budget provisions are better aligned with reality, I guess, if you will, to ensure that when we get to the 3-year mark, that our estimates are closer to what the actuary will find. But I'll have to just check the legislation and whether or not, given the fact that we did the review, whether our external auditors need to rely on that in order to provide an opinion on our liabilities at the end of the fiscal. But if my position would be we should use that primarily as a management tool to understand whether we're going the right way. Really quickly, we can do that by the number of cases that we have currently being managed by WSIB, and in 2022, if our cases are increasing, that liability is going up. It's not going the other way. So that's a really good early on indicator, and perhaps before we engage an actuary, we could certainly just ensure ourselves that because the case numbers are going up, we should conduct a review to ensure that we better align our position. So there's potentially a bit of a risk that we're going to have to book that every year, but maybe we can just review the legislation to see what that really means for us.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So for right now, we have a motion on the floor for staff direction to take this under advisement to review the 2022 year and 2023. So any other discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, so that staff direction is given. Is there anything further on number 3? I see none. So before we move on to bylaws, we have been at this for an hour and a half. So Sean, if you would take us offline, please, and everybody can take 10 minutes, and we'll come back to bylaws and go into closed session. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. And at this point, I will turn this back over to Mr. Foss for bylaws. Number 8, please, Mr. Foss.
Thank you very much, Chair. So we are on page number 23 of the report. And so it is that time of the year where we need to talk to you a little bit about tax policy and, for us, taxation-related bylaws. So we have a number of recommendations for you. Perhaps I'll come back to those, Madam Chair, after we just very quickly review the document itself. We don't have a lot of changes, really, for you this year, and we've met with your local municipal treasurers. We always have that meeting in the month of March, and we spend a significant amount of time analyzing the impacts of a variety of decisions that are before us each year, and that particular group is coming forward to you today with their recommendations on decisions that they are asking you to consider for tax policy in 2022. Again, not a reassessment year, so we are not dealing with a market-based reassessment and the impacts that that can have on us and the shifts that can take place between properties and classes and between the upper and lower tier because of a reassessment. So MPAC has already told us that we are still operating on current market value as of 2016. So here we are in 2022. And we have been told by the province that neither 2022 or 2023 will a market-based reassessment be considered. So 2024 is the first year where this will take place. So the biggest change that we have for you to consider today is something that we presented last year and we asked you to consider, and the group is still recommending that we move in that direction, and that is with respect to our industrial tax ratio. So the province in their shift to a new taxation model that took place in 1998, the Ontario Fair Assessment System, we talked about opening tax ratios, which is opening burdens of each class of taxation from the 1997 structure to the new Ontario Fair Assessment System, which came into effect in 1998. And essentially, they developed tax ratios, which is the relative burden for each of the business classes in relationship to the residential class, and they set those for us as they converted from the old system to the new system. So in the industrial category, we had ratios that were above, at the time, the provincial threshold, which was established for all municipalities in Ontario at a broad ratio of 2.63. So a tax burden for the industrial class, which could be no higher than 2.63 times the burden on the residential class. So each and every year, we have been levy restricted with our industrial class, and that simply means that you can't pass on any budgetary burden onto the industrial class, that all of the other classes are the ones that pay for your budgetary increases. So we have been dealing with this situation each and every year at tax policy time up until this year, where we are recommending that we move over a 2-year period from where we are today down to that industrial threshold ratio. So not in 2022, but in 2023, we are going to be in a position where all tax classes will pay their proportionate share of the tax burden, and none of them will be levy restricted. So that's our proposal to you today, and I'll highlight that as we go along. So as I mentioned, on March the 22nd, we had a meeting of your tax policy working group. And so the recommendations that you're seeing today have already been reviewed and discussed and agreed to by your local municipal treasurers. really, the first item is, in general, ratios are not changing, and that's because we're not doing a reassessment. So the province gives us a bunch of other tools that allows us to stop the shifts in taxation every time that there is a reassessment that takes place. But we don't have to consider any of those tools because a reassessment won't happen till at least 2024. But the top of page 24, you'll see at our April 2021 meeting of this committee, we proposed to do a reduction in the industrial ratio over a 2-year period, and you approved that concept. Although we didn't do anything in the 21 year, we let you know that this was our intention to bring this recommendation forward in 2022, reducing this ratio from 2.6, from where it is today, down to 2.63. So currently, the broad industrial ratio, which is 3.19541, we're going to bring it down halfway, to a broad ratio number of 2.900678 in 2022. What is the impact of that? Well, in upper and lower tier taxation last year, using last year's rates, the total impact of this would have been, over a 2-year period, would have been a 16.5% reduction in the burden on our industrial class and a 0.25% increase to all of the other classes. So just a shift in the tax burden. But we're not doing it all in 1 year. We're recommending we do it over 2 years. So roughly a 0.13% increase or shift in the burden to all the classes, and offsetting about an 8% decrease in the industrial burden across Renfrew County. That's year 1. Year 2, we'd like to bring it the rest of the way. So as I said, in 2023, when we set our tax rates, everyone will pay their proportionate share of the municipal budgetary increase, and we will no longer be restricted with the industrial class. So that's really the big change that we are recommending for you today. There's nothing new in the new landfill class. 2016, they created a new class, and there was some rules around what should be the ratio for this new landfill class. So it was originally set at the same as our commercial rate as 8.14, but every year this ratio changes and it moves to this revenue neutral, meaning they set a ratio for us which collects the same tax burden in 2022 as was there in 2021. So that ratio is a moving number, and that is the way they've constructed the legislation. So since 2016, we followed with this revenue neutral ratio for the landfill class. We did consider, at the top of page 25, once again, multi-residential in that situation. So since the Ontario Fair Assessment System came into effect in 1998, we have had a ratio for our multi-res class, which was higher than 1.943. There was an attempt province-wide to cap that, again, levy restricted, for anybody that had a ratio greater than 2. We weren't in that situation, so it really didn't impact us. But there was some discussion about what would it really take for us to be able to reduce the ratio for the entire multi-res group, whether you're a new multi-res or an older multi-res property owner. What would it take for us to reduce to a 1.0 factor or ratio for everybody? And you'll see that I've highlighted there are 108 multi-res properties in the county with an average current value assessment of $1.5 million. And there are only 5 new multi-res properties. Those are the folks that are enjoying a ratio of 1 instead of 1.943. If we were going to consider a movement to have everybody treated the same, whether they're an existing multi-res owner or an owner of new properties, that would be a reduction in the multi-res class of 47% reduction in their tax burden, and all the other classes would pay 1.17% more. So your treasurers are not saying let's never consider this, let's never do it. but simply because of the fact is we're dealing with the industrial ratio this year and next year, they're recommending that you consider stay the course. Don't do anything different in the multi-res class. Let's deal with the shift that's taking place for the industrial property owners, and then let's consider, are we going to recommend a movement for the multi-res property owners as well? Levy restriction, we're only halfway there with our industrial group, so there's still going to be a levy restriction calculation, so just be aware of that for 2022. Notional rate adjustments, that's just a silly option that I think only the City of Ottawa ever considers, so we're not even really going to talk about that. We have described that in previous years. It's not an option that we've ever elected to do. We just remind you about some of the previous decisions we made to remove discount rates for vacant and excess land, as well as the vacant unit rebate. We've removed those already. We don't really have an option to go back in time and put those back in place. We have, the province has filed regulations supporting what we have done here in Renfrew County. So really just a reminder. We have an option, again, to create a small business subclass. To date, only 2 municipalities in all of Ontario have considered this. That is the City of Toronto and the City of Ottawa. The subclass allows for a 35% reduction in commercial and industrial rates, with the possibility of the province matching that for their education tax rates. We've considered this again and at our meeting, and we are recommending that we don't move in this direction. Obviously, there are a number of reasons that I've listed here for us not to go in this direction. Nobody else has done it, so there's some support from your peers to not moving in this direction. But we all understand, if you're going to reduce the burden of any class, somebody has to pay for it. So that's an immediate shift in the tax burden to the other classes. The intention is good, and maybe it works in certain business zones in those major cities, but in a two-tier situation like we have in Renfrew County, we certainly don't see the benefit of creating a shift like this. Next to that on page 27 is optional small-scale on-farm business subclass. This has been available to us for a couple of years. We look at it every year. The change in the program this year is that the municipality may opt to a reduction on the first $100,000 worth of applicable assessment, where the old program was only the first $50,000. Our position is there are only 5 properties in all of Renfrew County that would qualify for this. The combined CVA of those 5 properties is only $192,000. That's the assessed value, not the tax value. That's the property value. So attempting to apply this to these 5 groups, we don't consider it really to be a very impactful decision. Perhaps in other communities, it's much more relevant. The only other thing of note really is that your treasurers need you to know this, but they've all agreed to the fact that they, at the local level, anticipate adopting a budget and being prepared to have tax policy bylaws in place at all 17 local municipalities by June the 17th. And we need that to be the case, because all of those folks need to enter those tax rates into the online property taxes analysis system, so that we can receive, or your local treasurer can receive essentially their billing information. They have an agreement with Opta to receive that download for your own municipal finance system, so that they can prepare final tax bills and send them out to your ratepayers in each municipality. So that's we can't move forward unless all municipalities are complete. So there seemed to be some concurrence that this is going to happen at the local level by that date. So with that, Madam Chair, maybe I'd go back just to the recommendations at the beginning of the page. There are 4 of them. And really, the first one is that this committee recommends to County Council that a bylaw setting the starting ratios be adopted for county purposes and lower tier purposes for 2022 be adopted at the next session of County Council. Second to that is that we recommend that County Council approve a tax ratio bylaw to include a revenue neutral ratio for the landfill class. That's a bit unique. It changes every year to 1.189066. Thirdly, that we recommend that we approve a reduction in the broad industrial ratio down to the 2.63 number over a 2-year period beginning this year. And finally, for our purposes, because we're still levy restricted for a portion of the industrial taxation burden, that this committee approved this year, like they have in every other years, that we apply this 50% of the tax burden to the industrial class. We are still allowed to do that because we're still levy restricted in the 2022 period.
Thank you for the overview. I'll ask for a mover and seconder to get this on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Brose, seconded by Councillor Hunt. Comments, questions, concerns? Councillor Donahue, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Foss. With respect to the multi-residential, so that we have now an established multi-residential and there is a new class for multi-residential, how long does a development remain in the category of new?
Through you, Chair, that's an excellent question. I believe there is a sunset date, and I believe it's 30 years. Correct, Daniel? 35 years, sorry. So you're new residential, multi-res, for a 35-year period, and then you would move out of that class.
Supplementary, 35 years doesn't sound so new, but okay. Go ahead, Councillor Donahue.
Everything is relative. The Earth is something like 5 billion years old, so 35 years is a heartbeat. So I'm just trying to understand all this. I'm presuming that the new multi-residential rate probably was the initial wave, if you will, of recognizing the housing challenge that was looming and was meant to induce, at least from a property tax perspective, some incentivization towards development. So certainly from that perspective, it would seem to be appropriate to continue to recognize this. I understand that the tax policy working group may have arrived at a kind of a consensus of deferral, but I think as a baseline, that is something to consider. On a broader scale, too, I'm going to approach this carefully because there is and I've been asking this kind of question for a little while. So on the ratios, this is in the first paragraph on page 23. It says, in addition, the tax policy working group suggests that we hold firm to the valuation principles we established many years ago. It goes on to state, if we had the ability to move to revenue neutral ratios and prevent properties from receiving the benefit of lower valuations, then we've made a fundamental shift in these principles. So I'm unsure. So the tax policy working group is working their way through these decisions, and I'm kind of wondering, and this is the first perhaps of a couple of questions, Madam Chair, is the tax policy considered kind of monetary policy? That is to say that it operates outside of the elected realm, or is that something that this committee and council could review? Because the reason I'm asking that question is because those valuation principles, I've kind of been driving at that for a few years. Every 4 years when there has been an assessment done, there are winners or losers. But I don't know if going all the way back to 1998, if there ever were principles established on what is the appropriate basis for assigning the burden of property tax, i.e., where is the consumption of the services provided through property tax by municipalities? Where is that represented, and how is that weighted? I know within the farming community, it's a ratio of 0.25. That is likewise capped. So if there were valuation principles established many years ago, I think that would be something. Is that is there a documentation to that effect, or is that something that could be brought forward to council through a future F&A committee sometime this year?
Mr. Foss?
Thank you, Chair. The reference to valuation principles in this case deals specifically with reassessment. And at reassessment time, of course, it's not a reassessment year, but assume that it was. And we had a market-based reassessment taking place in a particular class that really increased dramatically higher than all of the other classes. So let's assume that it happened to be commercial, it's a business class, and the commercial group assessment changed by 50% and residential only by 5%. We have the ability through tax policy and revenue neutral ratios to make that go away. And so back to the principles, we have the ability at reassessment time to use revenue neutral ratios to assume that everybody continues to pay their share of the tax burden by class that they did in 2021. So essentially, we have the power as an elected entity to say, yeah, well, that's what market-based reassessment says, but forget about it. We like the fact, we don't want to have the burden shift to the commercial class. We like the burden that everybody had last year. So let's use a different ratio and have the same proportionate burdens for everybody last year as this year. So that's the principle that we're talking about. And what we're suggesting is that year over year, we have had different property classes that have experienced tremendous valuation changes. And I'm going to reference 2 market valuations ago. Any properties on water, seasonal, permanent, any properties on water increased in their assessed value by 50%. And all of the other residential properties went up by 5%, I don't know, 10%, whatever it was. It was a dramatic difference for that particular group, properties on water. We did not, as a council, do anything about that. What we said, and back to the valuation principles, was that if your cottage, your home on water, is now worth, $500,000, and it used to only be worth $250,000, that is in fact the correct market value. You could sell that cottage for $500,000. That is the correct market value for that property. It's not incorrect. It's not a fictitious number. It is market-based reassessment, and MPAC does a very, very good job of collecting that information and ensuring that there's sales data for that type of property, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't make a move as a council to say, nope, we want to protect that group. And we want to not have them have an impact because their properties are now worth more relative to everybody else in the municipality. Last valuation cycle in 2016, it was the farm properties. And the farm properties were all seeing a dramatic increase in value of land, where we had the influx, if you will, in Renfrew County of lots of property sales, where we had potentially, maybe it was Southern Ontario farmers that were purchasing land, and the value of the properties in Renfrew County were increasing dramatically. And likewise, this council made the decision that we were not going to arbitrarily say, well, that's not really the market value, or we won't want you to have the tax burden associated with that new reassessed value. We're going to protect it, and we're going to have a lower ratio, if you will, so that you don't pay the tax burden that you should pay if you took the market-based assessment times the tax rate. So when we talk about principles, our principle as a group of treasurers is to say the Ontario Fair Assessment System is this. It's your market value as determined by MPAC times the tax rate. And that is what we're trying to achieve as we create tax policy each and every year. You'll recall we had a very significant issue with respect to commercial and industrial properties with respect to capping. And the province came forward with some legislation that said no property is going to ever see an increase greater than, remember the old 10-5-5, that's 98, 99, and 2000. Nobody can increase more than 10%, 5%, or 5% as far as their current assessment goes. And anybody above that, we're going to cap their amount of taxes. And it took us 20 years to get rid of capping here in Renfrew County, because our principle as a group of treasurers was that you should pay your assessed value for that commercial industrial property times the tax rate. That should be your tax bill. That is the Ontario Fair Assessment System. It's the market rate times the tax rate is going to get a property tax bill to you. Not that you should be protected from that because of some government policy. And we used every tool in our toolkit for 20 years to get those properties to full CVA value as quickly as we possibly could. So back to the principle, we have for 20 years always attempted to achieve market-based valuation from MPAC. County tax rate is your tax bill, not adjusted for any other purpose. That is our principle, to get everybody to full CVA taxation as quickly as possible, and not, in this statement on the bottom of 23, not electing some kind of a revenue neutral ratio to say, let's make that go away, let's go back to what the tax burdens were before a reassessment took place. That was kind of long-winded, Madam Chair, but that it kind of took that long to get back through the history. Thank you.
Thank you. You lost me at one point, but you got me back. Councillor Donahue, supplementary.
Just like Jerry Maguire. Through you, Madam Chair, thank you to Mr. Foss. Certainly the current value assessment, the property assessment process as it is currently structured in Ontario, absolutely. Whenever I have any ratepayer approach me with any concerns about their assessment, the first question that I ask them is, would you sell it for that? If you would not sell it for that, then you don't really have a concern. However, there is, of course, these two disparate elements that must meet in the middle, which is your assessment and how that indicates what your level of burden is going to be towards the property tax. So if it is simply the value of your home that essentially, from a high level, at its core, what it is saying is your property's value is a proxy for your income. Because, and I'll use, so most farmland is vacant. As you had indicated, Mr. Foss, in 2016, I saw a substantial change. Across my holdings, it was a 60%. But I had some that increased 40, and I had some that increased 80%. So let's set that aside because they are vacant and there's not a whole lot of burden imposed on a municipality for service from vacant lands. But with respect to the 2012 assessment, as you had indicated, waterfront property, the ratio to others shot up dramatically. So using that as an example, I live with my wife with no children, one dog in our waterfront property. I am paying, that class of property is paying X% towards the property taxes. I get this property tax assessment where mine has doubled. So I might have gone up like multiples of non-waterfront residential, but I'm still only taking 2 garbage bags to the dump. I'm still only having my road plowed the same number of times as it ever was. My burden of the property tax has changed substantially, even though my utilization of municipal services has not changed 1 iota. So I understand what you're saying, and with respect to the current value assessment and how that system, the challenge for me is it is so imprecise that here I have been a municipal politician now for 11 years, been head of council and a county councillor for 7+, and I'm still unsure how we're assigning where those burden of property taxes are. I understand clearly how we assign the burden. I don't understand what the basis is for determining that. Presumably in '98, when we moved to this system, there must have been some indication. The fact that subsequent to that, the province has said, thou shalt cap industrial. There was a reason that was put forward at the time, whether that was to induce more industrial development within the province of Ontario, I cannot say. But there was a conscious decision to change that ratio for a specific reason. So without knowing what the baseline was in '98, all of those things change all through time. So presumably if the farmland does not, in the next reassessment, change at the level of others, all of a sudden that burden has shifted again. So now, again, if it's waterfront property, now I'm back to paying less for my 2 bags of garbage than I was paying for the last 4 years, but about the same as I was paying in the 4 years before that. So there never seems to be an understanding of why, unless the value of your property is meant to simply be a proxy for your income level and your capacity to pay. That is essentially the challenge that I have sitting here, and it is certainly not one that Mr. Foss can answer. Certainly the nuts and bolts of how the current valuation assessment works and how municipal property taxation works, absolutely that is clear. The foundational standard of who bears the burden, who imposes the costs on the property tax system, that's an entirely different discussion. Anyway, thank you for the indulgence, Madam Chair.
Okay, if there's nothing further, can we move on, because this is one bylaw that it's gone on for 40 minutes, so. So with that, if there's nothing further, I did get a mover and seconder, correct? I did, thank you. It was so long ago. Okay, so I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor? Thank you kindly. All right, number 9.
Madam Warden, we have 3 more Madam Clerk, Madam Chair, sorry. We have 3 more recommendations in number 8.
Thanks, Rose. I thought we were doing them all at once, because Jeff read them all. Can't we do them all at once?
No, we should do them separately. Sorry.
Bummer. All right, the second, do you want to reread the second, because you did read all 4 of them.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Number 2, that the Finance and Admin Committee recommends to Council that the 2022 tax ratio bylaw include a revenue neutral ratio for just the landfill class. That is the class that changes by regulation each and every year, so that the burden from this year is exactly the same as last year, only for the landfill class as prescribed by the province.
Thank you. Moved by the warden, seconded by Councillor Brose. Is there any discussion? All in favor? And the third recommendation, Mr. Foss.
That this committee recommends that County Council approve a reduction in the industrial ratio down to the provincial threshold of 2.63 over a 2-year period beginning with this 2022 taxation year.
Thank you. A mover and seconder, please. Councillor Peckett, seconded by Councillor Sweet. Discussion. All in favor? Thank you. And the fourth recommendation, please.
And finally, Madam Chair, that this committee recommends that Council approve the 2022 tax rates for the County of Renfrew to include a calculation to apply a municipal budgetary increase for the industrial and larger industrial classes equal to 50% of the increase over the notional rates for the industrial class. This is that levy restricted situation where this will be the last year that we're going to have to go through this calculation.
Thank you for that. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Peckett, Councillor Brose. Discussion. It did take us a long time to get out of that situation. All in favor? Thank you. Now to number 9. Sorry, thank you, Rose. I just thought because Jeff had read all 4 of them, I thought I was covered. But I like that I was the warden, the clerk, and then the chair. I don't know who I am today. Take it away, Mr. Foss.
Number 9 is simply, now that we've adopted these policies, we can calculate the tax rates for the County of Renfrew for each one of the tax classes. This simply on the top of page 28. In January the 17th at the budget workshop, we adopted a municipal levy of $50,540,380. We're now going to take that levy and you apply these tax principles to it to calculate tax rates. And so we have the 2022 rates provided for you with comparisons to 2021. And the recommendation is that this committee recommends to County Council that a bylaw to establish 2022 tax rates for the County of Renfrew, for County of Renfrew purposes, be adopted at the next session of County Council.
Thank you. Mover and seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Bose, seconded by Councillor Hunt. Discussion. All in favor? Thank you. And finally, number 10, please.
Number 10 is really an update on a number of policies. We try not to bring these forward to you every month, but rest assured we have some staff that are diligently reviewing and ensuring that our policies are in compliance with current employment legislation in the province of Ontario, and that some of the issues that we come up against when we are dealing with a variety of matters are clarified in our policies so that, you know, in black and white, very plainly in plain English, everybody understands the intent of the policy language. So we have 5 policies before you. The first one is A09, misconduct in the workplace. We brought this policy forward to you in October of last year. Revised policy A09 was presented. We were asked to bring that back for further review, specifically for a clarification regarding the term illegal drugs versus narcotic or some other appropriate terminology. Staff have reviewed this and want to make you aware of the fact that we do have another corporate policy. It's corporate policy G08, impairment in the workplace, which is our drug and alcohol fitness for duty policy. That certainly addresses the management of impairment-related issues. So we are certainly willing to and very much ready to amend this particular wording in the policy to remove the reference for illegal drugs. And what we are doing is we are referencing for further detail our policy G08, impairment in the workplace. Policy number E01, hours of work and overtime. We last reviewed this a couple of years ago. We've changed the policy look and feel, the policy template, if you will. So some housekeeping things. We've removed the concept of hours and standardized to working days. And that is, of course, in response to Employment Standards Act legislation around hours of work and potential for overtime being triggered at a particular point in time, which isn't a daily point in time, which is a weekly point in time. Limited or listed the ESA entitlements for breaks and lunches that didn't exist in the policy before, clarified what the policy is for our non or other than full-time employees, non-full-time employees, and dealt with a particular group of employees in a separate schedule. So really just some housekeeping and ensuring that in fact we are referencing Employment Standards Act legislation within our own policy documents. All of these policies have bold and strikeout in them so that you can understand what the changes are as we go through them. Statutory and paid holidays, it was actually updated only 6 months ago. We are including the process for banked public holidays, again, in compliance with the Employment Standards Act, clarifying expectation for paying out public holiday banks in an effort to manage our ongoing corporate liability. So ensuring that come the end of the year, if we have staff that have hours in these banks, that we're able to pay those banks out, remove the liability, and start fresh in a new year. Policy E03 is statutory and paid holidays for other than full-time employees. Again, just highlighting the compliance with the Employment Standards Act and clarifying the expectation for paying out these banks, again, in an effort to manage our liability. Both of those policies are essentially dealing with the same issues, but one for full-time and another for part-time employees. And finally, E04, our vacation policy. Again, some housekeeping items with respect to the template itself. We are clarifying the process for vacation time entitlement for part-time employees. We are codifying is the word, or we are enabling through the policy language the current practice when vacation is in excess of policy. So in other words, your bank entitlement, which you are allowed to carry over from year to year, what happens if your vacation bank is in excess of the policy? Clarified the process for change in employment status with respect to vacations, so employees who are part-time to full-time or full-time to part-time, how are we managing that right inside the policy itself? And always including our references back to the Employment Standards Act legislation. So, Madam Chair, there are 5 policies that are listed. Perhaps any questions before I can read out the recommendation?
I can open it up to questions first. Questions, comments, concerns? Councillor Donahue, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No concerns whatsoever, just in reviewing them from a perhaps copy editing perspective. Just a couple of comments for consideration through you to Mr. Foss and to committee. At the bottom of page 100, this is with respect to the misconduct in the workplace, policy A09. Right at the very bottom within policy definitions, just suggest, so within this, code is not defined. I'm assuming that's the Human Rights Code, but there is also a code of conduct for the County of Renfrew, so it probably would be advisable to be specific that this is the Human Rights Code. Within that same paragraph, I'm just wondering if that's to be, in the very last sentence, belonging to a protected ground, or if it's protected group. And that was all that I had on that page. And then there was another on page, actually it is still the same policy. It is on page 104. The very bottom bullet point, this is with supervisor's responsibility, and it just identifies that call 911 in situations that may require emergency services. I'm presuming we specifically mean, given that we're discussing misconduct in the workplace, this is probably police services. And I would recommend certainty be provided there. Do not forget that we have emergency services, and if this is a misconduct issue, it is probably not the paramedics that we would likely be calling. Those are just a couple of recommendations for consideration, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Foss, are you amenable to those friendly amendments?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Bottom of page 104, I believe we can clarify the code issue on 100 Human Rights Code, and there are protected grounds within the Human Rights Code, and I think that's the reference to the wording grounds. But if we clarify the code to say Human Rights Code, I think that is probably stands on its own. Thank you.
Thank you, yes. And I too saw the emergency services, and I thought to leave it just in case there's also a health issue or an injury, but that's one that I would probably leave, but I'm open to suggestions. Councillor Donahue.
The only reason that I mean, there is certainly an element that you described, Madam Chair. The only reason I am suggesting is that this policy specifically is misconduct. So presumably if the misconduct has risen to the level that there is another employee, or perhaps tragically, hopefully never, a member of the public, I think that the supervisor would likely see fit. It's just this policy specifically is saying misconduct, and I'm anticipating that that would be security forces of some nature.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for can you please read the recommendation? But when I ask for a mover and seconder, can we just remember that we're just changing those two, we're leaving grounds, but we're including Ontario Human Rights Code, and we're changing emergency services to police services. Okay. Yes, Mr. Morrow. Sorry, Jeff.
Thank you, and not to prolong the debate, but it's my recommendation we leave it as emergency services, just for the purpose, because when you do call 911, they ask you for what service that you're looking for. So it is more broad general, and as 911 evolves to include things like mental health services, knowing that the OPP and others are now carving parts of that off to provide that service separately, I would ask committee to consider leaving it more broad so that when we do 911, we do call 911, we can explain the situation at that time, and that direction is more general for that reason. Thank you, Chair.
That's a very good point. So it would just be the Ontario Human Rights Code then, if we're accepting what our CAO is recommending. And I don't disagree with you, especially surrounding mental health. So Jeff, if you could read the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Chair. So on page 28, that the Finance and Administration Committee recommends to County Council that corporate policies AO9, misconduct in the workplace, EO1, hours of work and overtime, EO2, statutory and paid holiday, full-time, EO3, statutory and paid holiday other than full-time, EO4 and EO4 vacation be approved. And further, that a bylaw to amend bylaw 6303, being a bylaw to establish human resource corporate policies and procedures for the county, be adopted at the next session of County Council.
Thank you, Mr. Foss. I'd ask for a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Sweet, Councillor Hunt. Further discussion? All in favor? And could I get a mover and seconder for the report as a whole, please? Councillor Sweet, Councillor Peckett. Further discussion on the corporate services? Seeing none, all in favor? Wonderful. Thank you, committee. And at that, we are going to, I would ask for a mover and, I just needed the verbiage. I would ask for a mover and seconder to go into closed session pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended for the purpose of litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, insurance claims, and RCP lease. Could I get a mover and seconder to go into closed? Warden, Councillor Brose, all in favor? Excellent. We are now in closed. Sean, if you Thank you. Yes, I like the countdown, the count-in. Okay, welcome back, everyone. The date of our next meeting is Thursday, May 12th, 2022. And could I ask for a mover and seconder to adjourn, please? Councillor Donahue, Councillor Hunt, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Didn't think so. Good work today, team. Thanks.